Jesus speaks about the true and false notions regarding the Lord's Supper. July 4th to 6th, 1950. Message 4925. From Jesus through Bertha Dudde. Spoken by Pascal. All that I have spoken on earth is meant for eternity, and will therefore never lose the meaning I have given to my words. However, the fact that the people themselves ascribe a different meaning to them must never lead to the assumption that I endorse this distorted interpretation. Every person would have to come to the realization on their own that and why certain interpretations of my word are false, if only they would think earnestly on it. Yet they cling only to human interpretations, and less to my word, which also allows for another interpretation that should be pondered with the desire to recognize what is proper and true. There is certainly some justification for citing my word unchanged as proof of the truth of a doctrine of faith, but one must always bear in mind that it is not the word alone, but the spirit of the word that gives it meaning. Thus, every word can also be applied if one wishes to ascribe a different meaning to it. What I have now spoken always has its meaning only in connection with spiritual development, and must therefore always be interpreted spiritually. It must be seen in the context of the whole. A single word cannot be arbitrarily singled out and interpreted in isolation. My teaching is not incomprehensible, yet it does require enlightened thinking, for to an unenlightened mind, my words appear meaningless. Thus, the true meaning may be grasped by man only if his request for enlightened thinking has preceded it. If interpreted solely by the intellect, no connection can be found. Pure intellectual thinking gives my word a meaning that can sometimes even be contrary to what I intend to tell the people. For one thing must be borne in mind, that there is always a struggle between truth and falsehood or error, and that the representatives on both sides wish to win over the people's souls, thus seeking to influence their thoughts. The forces of darkness will always step in where the intellect alone is at work, because they cannot gain a foothold where the human spirit is enlightened by the person's will and his call to me. All you humans could be instructed by the spirit within you, and you would then immediately recognize where my teaching is marred by error, where my word is interpreted literally rather than in accordance with its meaning. You would also be able to correct any error yourselves through clear thinking, for you would then always be assured of my support, which I grant to everyone who seeks the pure truth. Yet the adversary strives to keep you in ignorance, and he will seek to obscure the truth precisely where important doctrines of faith are concerned. One heresy leads to another, and a false interpretation of my word constitutes a heresy. I cannot dwell in an earthly material form in any other way than that the spiritual, which is bound within this form, is a part of me, that is to slowly return to me after the former fall. However, as the most perfect being, I do not assume a form visible to you in order to be present to you in that form. I am present always and everywhere. Yet whether you perceive me consciously and tangibly depends solely on your attitude towards me. Therefore, you cannot unite with me through a specific act, but only through your self-development towards love, which brings about a direct connection with me. Consequently, you have a false notion of the Last Supper with my disciples, because once again you are taking only the literal meaning from the words I spoke to the disciples, but not the spiritual meaning. I distributed bread and wine, food and drink. I gave, and the others received. I will always be the giver, and distribute the bread of heaven, the nourishment of the soul, which it finds only in my word, granting it the strength for upward development. Do the same in remembrance of me. These words were the simplest indication of the fulfillment of the commandment of love for one's neighbor, which alone brings people the transmission of my word, which alone ensures my presence to them, so that I may thereby celebrate the Lord's Supper with them, as I have promised. My words and my actions were merely figurative indications of what they should do in remembrance of me. And whoever asks for the enlightenment of the Spirit will recognize clearly and understand the meaning of my words. For the awakening of the Spirit presupposes a life lived in love, and thus also union with me, which grants him the fullest truth. But as long as the people do not understand the spiritual meaning of my words, as long as they still believe me to be bound in an earthly material form, their spirit has not yet been awakened, and thus they cannot distinguish error from truth. Amen.